when we recognize that we all have bias and that we have similarity bias, we have affinity bias, and we have a negative bias towards people, we can't look at the individual anymore. We can't make it about the individual. We have to make it about the process. And this is the way that we actually see clearly and we align with actions, not people. We align with values, not people. So the fact that he can say Trump is such a godly example because he has an infinity bias for Trump, or maybe he even has like this bias around similarity bias where Christians believe that the Bible is the one truth, that everyone else is wrong, and everything else is demonic. And so if it honors and talks about the one true God, and it doesn't have to behave in the manner that this one true God is operating. It doesn't have to operate like that. And in fact, here's the infinity bias about the one true God and Trump is that God in the Bible is vengeful. God in the Bible is jealous. God in the Bible has chosen people. God in the Bible, Old Testament, takes land from certain groups of people because they're unworthy, they're nasty, the Philistine. It wages war on people. Yes, he is a representation of the God that they worship. They won't say that he's Christ-like. And if they say he's Christ-like, you ask them, how does he resemble Christ? And they will not have an answer for that. So Christ is the example for us to follow in the New Testament. However, the New Testament gets off track because Paul ends up coming back and bringing a lot of those old patriarchal ideas into the New Testament. Paul never met Jesus. Paul never walked with Jesus. Paul wasn't a disciple of Jesus. Paul encountered an entity that blinded him and then gave him back his sight. So Paul feared the entity, and he took his old religion, which was the religion of the Old Testament and the Pharisees, and he kind of mishmashed it with what Jesus taught. But in actuality, if you look later on, the things that Paul is teaching, sometimes it isn't in alignment with what Jesus said. It goes back to Old Testament principles and the Old Testament God. So when people say Trump is godly, when they say Trump is God's man, they're talking about the Old Testament God that had chosen people, that waged war on people, that was oppressive, that was proud and vengeful, and that had the right to bring harm on anybody who disagreed with him. So that is their infinity bias. If that is what they believe to be true, and they believe it to be true because the fear of hell, it's very difficult to dismantle or like for them to chip away at the things that they're seeing that they don't like, because they will do things that they don't like because they don't want to go to hell. They will do things that don't make sense because they don't want to go to hell. Hell is a powerful tool. Here's the other part about this too, because let's say Donald Trump does something that actually is helpful to all people. Let's say that, right? Like, would we be able to give him credit? Would we be able to say, you know what, this was actually helpful? No, because we have a bias that whatever he does, he has an ulterior motive, that there is something underhanded, which I don't think we're wrong. But it doesn't mean that someone can't be divinely inspired to do something good that they're not aware of that is good, right? And we will be afraid to say, yeah, he did this thing and this actually was helpful, because then it looks like we're aligning ourselves with someone who we don't like and don't agree with the majority of the things that they do. But if you talk about how your values would do something different, right? If you talk about my values really need to make sure that everybody feels safe, seen, and celebrated, that these kids who are growing up in this world have an example of what taking care of the least of these, right? So we use things about, say, Jesus, maybe that they can connect with and give an example about how this aligns with what it's like to be a beneficial presence, to not stir up hate, to not stir up fear. Talk about the process and the practice that brings our humanity, that brings peace and not war, that brings understanding and acceptance of other people. Those are the things that will be examples for them to connect with. So, one of the things that I really want to start sharing on a larger scale is this framework that I created called collaborative resolutions. And it's actually based upon a bunch of different processes that I have learned. I've honed it to be a process for dealing with communication with people, dealing with teamwork, and dealing with when we're facing challenges, right? So this can be used in any of those situations when you're in a relationship with somebody and you need to communicate with them. Doesn't matter what you communicate with them about. When you are working with somebody and you need to be able to communicate in a way that is collaborative, that doesn't hold your view or your perspective higher than theirs and expect them to meet you, all that other stuff. And then when encountering challenges, like we are experiencing this, how do we honor everyone's unique voice, unique perspective, so that we can address all of those things and find a solution to the challenge? Because there's no problems, there are only challenges, and challenges all have an answer and a solution. So, the first thing is grounding. Like, we need to be grounded within ourselves. We need to know that we are connected to source, that we're connected to all things, even people who are operating outside of their alignment, that there is something, there is a piece of them in which that are connected to us and connected to the divine and connected to truth. And so grounding ourselves into the truth, not just our personal truth, but the truth of the nature of our being, is divine oneness, is collaboration, is cause and effect. We understand that there's something that we are experiencing because of something that happened. So we can be at cause or we can be in reaction. The law of resonance, right? That says that if we're experiencing something, it also exists within us. And we have to, like, when we experience it, we see it and we get to learn from it. So we ground into all of these universal truths. And then we find a value, right? We find a value that we know the other person has already verbalized and connected with, that we can take our value that connects with that value and we center the conversation, we center our brainstorming, we center our communication over this value. So maybe the value is truth. Maybe the value is oneness, knowing our interconnectedness, knowing that we can only reach our highest potential together, all of that. And then we collaborate, right? And the collaboration looks like, what are the challenges that you're experiencing? What are the things that you need? Where do you have concerns, right? What are the things that you need addressed, right? And that everybody has a voice in that. So if it's 5 people that are in this collaborative discussion, everybody gets to voice their opinions, their needs, their concerns, the challenges that they're experiences. And then in the collaborative process, no one is left out. No one's concerns are left out. No one's perspective is left out. And we find a solution using all of those pieces of the puzzle, right? You can't, if you have 5 pieces of a puzzle and you're trying to find a solution with just one of them, you're not going to get to see the picture. You have to use all 5 pieces, and they're equally powerful, necessary, and sacred. And so that requires a whole lot of work because it requires that you understand the other person's perspective and you use that value to assist you in seeing from their perspective, but also using the information in your perspective to create a solution. And then you all agree, like, can we agree to this? Can we agree to that? Can we agree that this is what is necessary? And it's not around a person, it's around a process. Like I said, because you can have a bias around a person, but around a process, the process addresses all the challenges and need. Now, For someone who doesn't care about the needs of other people, you can't have this conversation because they're not even in agreement to collaborate with you. And then at the end, after we've done the collaboration, we're like, yeah, this is something that we can try. Let's try this. Then we have to go into the restorative part, right? Because this is where a lot of things that have happened or things that have been said that have created harm in the relationship or broken down issues in the communication, sometimes we just hold on to those things, and those things, when they're not dealt with, they create resentment. And so that restoring piece is really about, like, is there anything that I've said that has brought harm to you? Is there anything that we need to resolve between us? What restitution might we need to have? You called me this name and that really hurt me. And then, you do the healing work between the individuals. So this framework could be used in government, can be used in friendships, can be used in workplace. Like, this way of communicating and this way of collaborating, this way of solving challenges in the world, this is what we need. This is like the framework of creating a world that works for everyone and that makes sure that we're all safe, that we feel seen, that we feel celebrated, that our unique voice and our social, emotional, and physical needs are met. This is a practice of equality and justice, which is love in action in community. Thank you for allowing me to share. And I would love to hear any insight that you have, any thoughts that you have. Do you feel like this is something that you could use, focusing on, like, not making them right, not making them wrong, but clear communication in a way that creates collaborative discussion? That's the goal. How can we enter into that conversation? And that's what happens in the grounding space, right? Where we understand that we're not right about everything, that we have biases, and that we need to make sure that we're in alignment with truth, with justice, with equality, with all of our values, and in alignment with source before we go into a space. And knowing that when we're in alignment with source, that we're already in collaboration with the other person. It doesn't even have to manifest because we know that we're connected to them through our divineness. So we're not even going into the conversation speaking to the version of them that's right in front of us. We're connecting with their higher self. And that collaboration at that level is doing exactly what it needs to do. If it looks like them getting triggered and walking away, but you're still standing in your peace and you're still doing the personal work of the framework, even though they're not, like, that's also part of the divine purpose as well.